Man of lawlessness.
For the book, the man of lawlessness. Very different question.
I think the idea of it, I'm fine with it. I think that you can find Quinn. I think you can find early changes that were happening in the first, all the way to the in the first century into the second, early forms of Catholicism. I do think that was happening. Paul probably warns against it as well to his letter to Timothy. We were talking about that recently. So not per se like as we understand it today, but I think there were ideas of somebody raising up that shouldn't be doing those things.
I was reading through that the other day, and I was like looking at all the different views that people have on it, and the Pope, and then the like general rejection of the gospel are the two that like
The what?
The general like rejection of the gospel kind of made the most sense to me.
Really?
But I don't know. Like I really just
There's a lot of personification to get talking about a man of lawlessness and just in general. I think it's just because people are afraid to say it. Just call it what it is, man.
Mr. Camp, would you rather have $10,000?
Billy? Did you say Billy?
Mr. Camp.
You said Billy? Is that what you said?
Mr. Sir Camp.
That's your fault. Would I rather have what? I'm not answering this question. I just want to know what it is.
Would you rather have $10,000 or a talk with Joseph Smith? Dude, you should see the BYU students answer this question.
Who answered it?
BYU students. They love that question. They say Joseph Smith.
We'd rather have $10,000 or a talk with Jesus.
You know what? Maybe one day you can be like Joseph Smith and add your own books to the Bible.
What?
What?
I called out the Pope last Sunday. Actually, we're talking about doubt of the will, which is a doubt of God's sovereignty or a doubt of His judgment. When you control doubt, you raise yourself up and elevate yourself in the position of God. I didn't do it in a like, I tried to do it in a very non-aggressive way.
Damn darn guy.
I looked at the room, there weren't any little Catholics sticking around. I was like, I'm good. There were like 20 people. There's one on the wall.
Wait, hold on. Who's worse, Mormons or Catholics?
Mormons. Just not even close.
That's true.
Yo.
I like the slogan. It says it's from Ephesians 4. It says one faith, one baptism, 0 wounds.
Did you see that?
Dude, one day until instead of skills was the day we go to 104. For real?
Is that the legal path or ledger is 11/17? Legal should be up there.
That's literal.
What do you think?
I've got some frames and I'm gonna put like verses in, like our key verses for the past 4 years or so. And hang them like around the, and
Everybody and their mom asking about
they're looking for 14 years. So,
Are we about to test this out?
just need to print them. There's so much to do with the sword. But I didn't.
Yes.
Oh no.
Yeah. His chat was only gotten better.
Hey.
I know it's not.
Raise your hand.
I don't know, man. We might do Sunday night, but.
So I figured out where she likes to go.
I'll actually agree with
The David
you.
Mr.
Other
Wilson.
than that, you know,
Yeah, he's
Oh no.
combined
Yes.
classes.
Really?
You did?
You, that's all I describe him. But and your in-house chapels and that. I mean,
Have you seen this chapel? It's just, I don't like this song.
I mean, they don't really have to tell you stuff.
Hey, those are the, we actually have 4 boxes.
Okay.
You know this.
Yeah, the first time I watched like
That's Thursday.
Oh, yeah. It's a good song. I don't know about that.
And then you might,
It's a good, it's, okay, don't David Hester. Call it, I'm already in that here, but
yeah, just say, yeah. We'll text you. Right, so.
That's Sunday night.
Oh my gosh.
It's one of those songs that's like maybe really
So we all like the neck out, shouldn't have?
I'm gonna make it have anyways every time. Next one.
No, I'm gonna play.
I wouldn't know.
Everybody's good share.
I was the Highlander.
All right. Let's take this up here. Okay.
So good. Except for when you get to Christmas. He cannot. He's not yes. Oh, like it's one of those things that when I first like heard and then I listen to the song, I'm like, I wonder what Christmas was. There he is. Yeah, there he is. Part of this.
Need some more people. I'll do it. I signed up. It's fine. Yeah.
Are you hopping on the bus?
I don't know how to understand. And then
I have lost.
absolutely no idea what
It was like, you can also get really sad.
I mean, it's like capper people.
It looks so
Yeah,
sad.
but it's just, you can't like reach around something when you're guarding. You can't like, if you're just going up, you go straight up, you can't slap it off, if you slap, you're gonna get called for a foul. But that bucket's, there's multiple others, I never bought them, but one year that I finished, you're like, are these new? I know. Oh, you know what? Yeah, when I I can never run a fast. I can kind of shoot, but I can shoot up there. I'm literally just gonna run right now. And I can be, which is pretty much what I do right here.
That's John is not an excuse for president's religion. As an adult,
I know I was saying,
they're hating, you're doing something right. This is like so
Yeah, 100%.
what are we doing? Just to someone who's body.
They got rid of the I know, I was like 3 or 4.
Wow, that's the worst one. Dude, what
This dimension's in my brain.
this man is Nobel Prize.
That was definitely his ball.
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna ask Evan. Pretty much everybody really.
Imagine.
We didn't do the historical thing.
I'm trying to remember what was in this plane.
Yes, the historical Jesus.
I know we're not the ones that are
You don't know.
My nose, you would have heard.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get it, I get it.
So I sent to Dalraida College.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
You said it.
I don't think that's a good idea.
Oh my goodness.
No, I
would do
don't
that.
worry
I've been so
about it. It's just a-
That was my.
Sorry.
Actually, no.
I know this thing. I thought it was a weird time. That's the people.
Will's first grade. Will's first grade. That was
Big man.
generates in prices to take his phone away.
Oh, did you get thrown under the bus though?
And he doesn't have to call.
As long as you don't feel like that's like.
So I have a question. Why do, this is a serious question. So for like capital reasons, why
Tell
do
him to stop smiling.
why do capital reasons have like little wipes on the paper? Is there any significance?
So one of our elders, this is one of our elders, Brian, who's just back there, he was a captain. So he was very active in there. Jeff, he's very active. Yeah. So he's going back there working hard. Go ask him that question. All right, let's get started. And we're 10 seconds early. It's okay. All right, a couple of announcements going on. College students, for you guys, that you have combined class next week. That's going to be in the fellowship hall. We have spaghetti and meatballs for dinner at 5:30. And university and anybody else who's going to be coming over here as well. So that's why it's the combined class. And then Adam Smith, one of our members, he's going to be teaching. And his topic that night is... Where'd he go? Oh, he gone. Okay. Anyways, he's going to have a topic very relevant to you guys. So anyways, that's next week. Make plans for that. This weekend is our in-house retreat, our Dalraida in-house retreat. That's going to start Friday night at 6 o'clock. We'll have a fish fry. We'll have a devotional that night. Saturday, we got a lot of good things that are going on. We'll have breakfast at 9. Give everybody a chance to sleep in. And we'll have some devotionals. And in the afternoon, we'll hang out, have some games, have our annual kickball game. And that'll be a lot of fun. And then we'll have a bonfire to round out the night on Saturday night. So that's for everybody, no cost. Just come and hang out and be a part of it. And then also for Sunday night, there will be no Sunday night gathering at the Kidwell house. So don't even ask. Even if they say they're going to do it, they're not going to do it. So just know that's the case. All right. That's the announcements we got. And now let's get rolling. All right. So we are picking up our discussion. We're taking a new path tonight, but we got to get a little bit of traction going just because I like a refresher. So Nate's going to tell us the cultivation questions. What are the 5 cultivation questions?
Corralling questions are,
The cultivation questions.
I don't remember.
Okay, all right. Who wants to do the 5 cultivation questions? You're starting a conversation. How do you start a conversation? I want all 5. And I've got them in particular order, Tommy. Do you want to try the order?
Where did everything come from?
Sure.
What are humans?
Mhm.
Nope.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah,
Yep.
we're humans. What is our purpose?
Good.
What is good? What is
Yeah, that's
good?
fine. You can swap them around. That's fine.
What is good? What is our purpose? And what happens after we die?
Yeah. So I keep them on my mind in that way because you got to have a start to everything, which is where everything come from. And then we are in creation in this universe, so want to understand us as humans. For us to judge what kind of universe we're in, we need to know what is good. And then we want to figure out our role in the universe once we figure these things out. So what's our purpose and what happens when we leave it? So what happens when we die? So that's how I remember them in my order, okay? Not that you have to do that, but that's just how it is. So you do have those questions, and then we have our corralling questions, which is where you rein in a conversation. And those are 3 questions that you can ask in varying ways, but I have a shorthand of that. What are those 3 questions?
What do you mean by that?
And?
How did you get to that conclusion?
And?
Have you ever considered?
Okay, all right, so those are good. Nate's not in here. He just called out again. If you want to ask him how to utilize those questions, ask him some advice based off of previous conversations, how well it goes using those questions. So I'll let you do that at another time. So, all right, so there's your questions. You get those going. Now, as we're going along, we are going to come across a conversation. We're not going to go and look at evidence for God. We're going to go down and look at evidence for Jesus. Now, what we studied last week was evidence for the historical Jesus. Some of you are looking, you can't do that because we got to go through the evidence. All right, so we are leaving from the open country, and we are making our way through animations that shouldn't be there right now. All right, we're making our way through here, and we're going to go across, we're going to go down, and we're going to go through the neighborhoods. And the first neighborhood that we come across is what? What's the first line of logic if you're talking about evidence for Jesus? What do you look at?
Historical.
All right, we're going to try and figure out who is this man. Historical evidence for Jesus, all right? And the way that we're going to do that is I want you to imagine there are 2 houses. Now, we only went through one house last week, and I had a particular way for us to work through that. And we did it as a mind map or a mind palace, if you will. And then there's another one. This is going to be what the Bible says, so the New Testament writings. And we're going to be able to take this on a different path to be able to look at reliability of the Bible. But I do want to talk for a second about these non-Christian sources for Jesus. And let's see if you guys have memorized how this works. All right, so I wanted you to visualize that there is this house. All right, the bottom floor of the house, it's got 2 floors. The bottom floor of the house has 4 rooms to it. You go upstairs, there's going to be a room, and I changed this because we were talking about this. There's a room, and then there's a bathroom, okay? So that's how you got to be able to place things in their proper order. All right, so can somebody tell me when you first walk into the house, what is that first room you come across, and what is the non-Christian source that, what do you see there, and what does it remind you of non-Christian source? Now remember what you got.
It's a living room with a roaring fire and a guy sitting there with a tack.
All right.
Or Tacitus, who wrote about the great fire that was in Rome that was blamed on the Christians.
Nice. All right. So you have Tacitus or Tacitus, right? If you want to think about it that way to connect it. Okay. All right. So you move here, so you know that he's one of the guys that's going to talk about Christianity, and he does lay out some things about Jesus. He talks about this man named Christ. He had a following. Okay. Good. All right. You go into the next room. What's the next room? The dining room. All right. What do you see in the dining room?
Tiny Pliny.
Tiny Pliny. What's he doing?
He's underneath the table.
Yeah.
And Pliny the Younger,
Yes.
and he wrote about. Oh yeah, wait, didn't he like sit in on some church services, saw what was going on, and said they weren't like a problem?
Yeah. All right. So he investigated the assemblies of the church. And so Tiny Pliny was listening, and he heard that they were singing chants back and forth, and they were talking about things, they're taking vows, and they weren't doing anything bad with their meals, right? They were having just common meals. They weren't cannibals, as we remember the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and we do that through the Lord's Supper, okay? So you go from the dining room into, what's the next room?
The kitchen.
The kitchen, all right? And what do you see in the kitchen?
Good old Lucian stirring the pot.
Lucian stirring the pot, right? A luscious pot of stew, and Lucian is stirring it. Do you remember anything that Lucian talked about in particular? He's stirring the pot about some stuff. Do you remember what it was? Got some backup? Ready to jump in?
Yeah, bro, you got it.
All right, what did Lucian talk about? Does anybody remember?
They weren't serving Rome or
Yep.
Caesar.
Yeah, so they were not bowing down to Rome. They weren't doing any of the worship, so, Rome and their imperial cult worship, and they were not really stirring anything up in a negative way. The Romans just didn't like them, so Lucian is just stirring that pot, trying to make you hate the Christians because of how they were treating Rome, all right? So then you leave from the kitchen into, what's the other room? I altered this one just a little bit. I think it's going to help us memorize it a little better. I don't think I was as successful last week. Remember what was in there?
Is it an office?
It was an office.
Is it Suetonius?
Suetonius, all right. Do you remember what Suetonius talked about?
He was writing something.
He was writing something, so he's sitting at his desk, and just so you remember, all right, I got behind on my animation, Suetonius, see there's a pink suit there, so you can remember a vibrant pink suit, something that David Baker would wear, and you've got Suetonius that's sitting there, and do you remember what he was talking about? He was writing something, he's doing some histories, and there was a particular event that was secular history that also carries over to the New Testament as well, it has to do with Corinth, some things that happened there.
The dispersion?
The dispersion, all right, but we're talking about where the Jews got kicked out of Rome, but he also said the Christians were part of that as well because of them serving and opposing Rome itself. So it actually helps us correlate a few things, but he mentions Crestus in there as well, all right? So then you go from the bottom floor to the top floor. The bottom floor is all what? What's the common theme with those non-Christian sources? What are they? They're Roman sources. So you go upstairs, and what are the other sources up there? The Jewish sources. There's two rooms. All right, there's a big room. This is where we talked about a little bit. All right, this is the big room, and you're going to the kids' room. Okay, that's going to be a kids' room. Why are we going to talk about it as a kids' room? What do you hear as you're going up the stairs? What are they doing? They're fussing, right? And who's fussing? Josephus, right? Josephus, all right? I call my kids Joes, by the way. I got Jojo, Joe, Josephine, and then Mama Joe. All right, so Joseph, all right? Josephus, right? They are fussing. And what are they talking about? What's Josephus write about? Does anybody remember? Him in particular. What kind of facts does he give us? There's two main sections of his writing, just for you to have stored away. You don't have to know where they come from necessarily. But what are the two things he talks about when it comes to Jesus?
Him being crucified.
All right, you got him being crucified, and he talks about, the timing of it and everything, and then this man was just very particular, and people are concerned about him in different ways, maybe suspicious of him. All right, and then what's the other thing? Not about Jesus necessarily, although it's a connection. He mentions another historical person along with Jesus, his brother, which was James. So Josephus tells us that Jesus' brother was one of the leaders in the church, and he was martyred because he was a follower of Christianity. Now, that's going to be important for what we talk about tonight, but you need to have that stored away. When Josephus tells us two things, gives us some facts basically about Jesus, but he also tells us that James, the brother of Jesus, died. Now, if you remember, there were some things about James that he was not a believer, right? Initially, during the ministry of Jesus, until something significant happens, all right? And then you go into the last room. Like I said, if you want to remember that's the bathroom, you walk in there, and this is, not being crass, this is mud, okay? This is mud that you find in the mud room or in the bathroom upstairs. But what's the other thing that, the other Jewish source that we learned from? The Talmud, okay? And that's where it tells us some things that Jesus was crucified on the eve of the Passover, and those are things that were passed around. There were a couple of other statements in there, and it's interesting, the more you dive into the Talmud, it does talk about there was this man, he had some followers, he had some, they didn't call them apostles per se, but he had these men that he was closely associated with who maybe even potentially were willing to die for that. So you get those facts. So I just wanted you to remember that you got some Roman sources, you got some Jewish sources, and that is what's available to us, okay? So now we move from here, all right? I've got double time that we're going to do tonight. I want you to go to the next house. You're still in your map, all right? And you're still underneath the historical Jesus. And there's something that we don't need to be afraid of, and it's the Christian sources. The animations are out of order. There we go. All right, I'm not going to dive too deeply into this because I think you understand the Christian sources. But think about it in this way. We refer to the Bible as a whole, but it's really composed of what? What makes up the what? 66 individual books. How many of them specifically talk about Jesus or give a biography of Jesus? 4, right? All right, so you have 4 separate pieces of evidence, and scholars across the board recognize that. They're not going to say, oh, those are the same book. No, you have 4 different authors. Now, they may not agree necessarily on who the authors are, what they do exactly, but we have the Bible. But we also have some other people that write about Jesus. You have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but you also have Luke that wrote 2 books, right? You got John that wrote First and second, and First, Second, Third John, Revelation, as well as his gospel account. But you have Paul, who writes majority of the New Testament, as well as Jesus' brother James, and then you've got some other people sprinkled in there as well. They all serve as pieces of evidence to tell us that there was a man in the first century whose name was Jesus. Now, if you're just going to look at it as a piece of literature, I'm going to give you some ideas. This was from last week. We didn't really get into the historical, the keys for understanding the historical Jesus by using the Bible. There's some neat things, because somebody may say, well, you can't read your Bible. You can't use that as evidence for Jesus because it's so biased. I mean, these are people that are claiming to be there with Jesus, so of course they're liars and they're fabricators, and they're just unreliable. But what we're going to find out, and this will carry us on as we look at this as well, that the Bible is historically accurate. We should be able to trust it. Even if you didn't believe that it was inspired, that it came from God, you should at least know that it tells us accurate history. And there's a lot of fun things to do with that. So that's what I want to spend a moment talking about before we get to evidences for the resurrection. And the other one is what we're going to call early Christian writers. And I won't get too much into that. But that's another idea, is that you have these guys early into the first century, some of them claiming, and I have no problem looking through this, some of them claiming that they were disciples of John. So Polycarp would be one of them. And Polycarp had some people that came after him, and so they're just passing around Christian teachings, okay? So you can call them early preachers, but some of them, of course, diverged from what the truth is, but it tells you there at least was a pattern within, if Jesus died around, let's just rough numbers, just say 30 AD, just to say within a decade on that, 30 AD, and then you've got them that are writing 70 years later, and we have their firsthand accounts of they're saying, look, we're Christians and we serve this guy who died 70 years before we started believing. Well, that's better evidence than some of the people that we have in history, like Tiberius Caesar and Julius Caesar, some of the Roman leaders that the earliest documents that we have that talk about them come like 80 to 100 years after them. So you can use early Christian writings to just make a point about the historical Jesus. You can use the New Testament as a piece of literature to talk about the historical Jesus. That's all you're doing before you get into inspiration. We'll have a whole case for why we can know that the Bible is the Word of God. But at least know that you can use these things and talk about them. Now, the way that I want you to memorize this, what we're going to call historical reliability. Okay, there goes the animations again. Unfortunate. Okay. So this was the handout last week we didn't get to. But it was the idea that how can you know that the New Testament is reliable? What we're going to call this is historical reliability. All right, there was a whole little, remember that little tab, the little side of your handout that said historical reliability, or the keys to unlocking the historical. That's what this is. I want you to think about a key, okay? And as you think about an old key that's going to go into a lock, it has teeth that are on it. And those teeth are going to push up the pin when it goes in, and you're going to be able to unlock. So maybe if you want to think about, why should we trust the New Testament? Why should we trust Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Paul? How do they stack up against other writers like Tacitus and Pliny, and people that we're familiar with that wrote later on, but like Herodotus, or any of these other pieces of literature? Well, what's interesting about what the Bible includes, and this is going to help us for our case tonight as we think about the resurrection of Jesus. Think about when you put a key into a lock, all right? The first part of it goes in. This is interesting about what we have with the Bible, is that it gives us, it's early. It doesn't come 200, 300 years after Jesus was on the scene. I mean, our first letters that we have very early on, all right? The evidence within them, and this is where you can even have people like Bart Ehrman that says he said, we can know what was taught about Jesus within 2 years past his death. You cannot argue that with other historical characters. So the New Testament letters themselves, whether you're dealing with the gospel accounts or Paul's writings, they're early. It's not something that developed hundreds of years later and where you got this myth or this legend. They're early. So think about a key that you're going to put in. So if you can visualize it, the first part of it that goes into the lock, it's early. Then another part of it, you think about a key that's got these heads that are on there for it to pop up the different pins. Another thing about the New Testament letters, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Paul's letters, James himself, is that you've got multiple different accounts. It's not just one book that's telling us about Jesus. There are other religions that only have one book. The Bible is composed of multiple different pieces of literature, multiple different lines of thought. So what did Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John all say about Jesus? So there's multiple pieces of evidence. All right, think about this key. Let's say that it's got a tooth that's just, out of whack. All right, it's bigger than all the other ones. They also include embarrassing details. Now, let me ask you this to help us as we're moving on to the resurrection. Who was the first person to see the resurrected Jesus? Do you know? Who was the first person to see the resurrected Jesus?
Isn't it Mary Magdalene?
Mary Magdalene. What do you know about Mary Magdalene's past? If you look at her story when she appears in the gospel accounts, when Jesus interacts with her, is she a noble woman that was part of the government and everybody looked up to her? No? What was her background? Do you remember?
Didn't she have like demons?
Yeah. She had like 7 demons, okay? And she was known for that. And so if somebody was going to look at, all right, if I'm going to tell you the story and I want to prove that we have a new king. Remember, this is King of Kings. He's the one that is part of the eternal kingdom. And he's reigning. And if you're going to tell his story, do you want him to die a horrible death? No, you'd want him to die a noble death, right? And do you want the first person to see him and claim to see him raised from the dead? If you're going to corroborate a story, you're going to make it up. I'd be like, man, if I'm going to make up a story, I want Pontius Pilate to see him first, the one that condemned him to death. I want that to be the first person that sees the resurrected Jesus. So if I was going to make up a story, I'm going to have him marching into Pilate's hall, doors slam open, chairs fly out of the way. He stands before Pilate and he says, I am risen, right? That's how I would want to invent a story like that. But the way that the gospel accounts, all 4 of them, they account that it was the women that saw him first. Now, this is also important for historical literature in the first century, that a woman's testimony in the first century was not actually accepted in court. It was less than a partial vote of a man. And so by them saying, her coming along and saying, I saw the resurrected Jesus, that would mean nothing. But if you're just telling the facts of a story, you're going to include all the things that even may be embarrassing. All right, that would be an embarrassing thing. But also think about some of these other things. If you're going to tell a story about Jesus, it's also embarrassing that his family thought he was out of his mind. That his own apostles didn't even understand what he was talking about. Right? Do you see that in the narratives where his apostles like, why are you teaching them in parables? We don't understand what you're saying. The crowd that's following him, they run away from him. His own hometown wants to throw him off a cliff. You keep going through. Are there some what we classify as embarrassing details about Jesus that are recorded in there? Like if I wanted to tell you a story about this man who wants to be King of Kings and I want you to look up to him and revere him, I want everybody to love and respect him. Is Jesus loved and respected all throughout his ministry? No, right? People hate him. They even say that he must have a demon or he must be a glutton, something like that. So those are embarrassing details. That's going to tell you that these guys are just telling you the facts. It's early. It's multiple pieces of evidence. They include embarrassing details that somebody might want to scrub from the story to make it better. But there's also another thing. If you look at all 4 of the gospel accounts together, are they all identical? No. Have you read John? Have you read like Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then you read John and thought, are y'all telling the same story? Right? Because there are things like in what we call the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they see things together. They're described in a particular order. John's written a little bit later. He comes in, he's like, let me tell you some things that, not that they missed and like everything's doomed. He's like, I just want to tell you more of the story. There's stuff like the cleansing of the temple. That comes early in John's gospel account, in John chapter 2, versus later in the synoptics, like in Matthew chapter 24. So they're dissimilar. And that's fine. If I'm going to tell you a story, or if we're going to, let's say that we all witnessed something together, and I took you each one by one, and I took you into a room, and I asked you, hey, what happened today? Since you guys are, maybe we'll use something that we all experienced. So like for those that went to chapel on, big chapel on Tuesday or something like that. If I were going to ask what happened, I'm going to take each one of you to the side, and I'm going to interview and ask what happened in chapel. Some of you sat down front. You couldn't see what was going on behind you. Some of you sat up in the bleachers. Some of you didn't go at all, right? Maybe you watched a video of it, whatever it is. You see, the fact that they're dissimilar actually shows that it's more reliable. If everyone said the same thing, it would look like the evidence was tampered with. Brian could speak on this if he wanted to about interviewing people as a detective, but that'd be the idea is that they're dissimilar. They don't match identically because they're telling it from their own perspective. And the last part is the credibility of what they're saying. Like, have you ever paid attention to Luke when he writes his gospel account? He includes all kinds of details that you're like, why would you even put that in there? He got historical markers. When he mentions a place, a name, a geographical landmark, you can find those things potentially, right? They're corroborated in the sense of, or they're shown to be credible when he mentions something like in the book of Acts. He mentions a place like Corinth, and he mentions people that were converted, and we have found archaeological evidence to support that those people actually existed. So if you were to take all these and just use it as a key to be able to get into that house of understanding the New Testament and the reliability of it, this is what you get, okay? It's something that you can hang your hat on. So this is what historical reliability looks like. Now the reason why I did this is because now I want to look at what we have in regards to evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, because all of these things matter. And I've got a quick way that we're going to go through it to make it memorable, hopefully. So you leave the neighborhood. All right, I got a few things on this, but we'll just leave it there. All right, you leave the neighborhood for the historical Jesus, and now let's talk about the resurrection. All right, you'll see on your handout, so you got your map that's open. On your handout, you have 6 houses. What do you notice about the color of those houses? Besides that they're colorful, what? They're rainbow colored, although we're missing one, right? So Roy G. Bipp, okay? That's how you're going to have to remember this, Roy G. Bipp. All right, it's not going to be Biv. We put purple and indigo together just to get purple. Now, each one of these houses is going to represent a different piece of evidence that we're going to have to examine. If you collect all of them together, what we're going to consider the minimal facts argument. You put all of those houses together, you're going to have to decide, is the evidence sufficient enough for us to conclude that this man probably was actually raised from the dead? So that block at the top of your handout that says minimal facts argument, put this definition in there. This is going to be important. When we say something minimal facts, this is what we mean. It's a historical fact about Jesus specifically, but you could do this just in history in general. You would want to use those resources that are early, the ones that have multiple different pieces of evidence, the ones that include embarrassing details that are dissimilar, as well as the ones that are credible sources. They've got some credentials behind them. Whatever it is, that you have some facts about Jesus, what we're talking about tonight, that are exceptionally well evidenced. For every fact that we're going to make, so every one of these houses, you can put at least 3 pieces to 7 pieces of evidence underneath it. Now, I'm going to tell you what this means in just a moment, okay? But we're going to say a minimal fact is going to be something that, a fact that we say about Jesus, and it's got to have multiple pieces of evidence that's underneath it. And it also has to be accepted by critical scholars, virtually all critical scholars. What we mean by that is your atheists as well as your theists. Those that have studied the languages, those that have studied the manuscripts, those that, they don't really care to prove anything at all. They're just like, we just want to be good historians. So that's your, like your Bart Ehrmans and things along those lines. They're all going to say, these are things that we know about this man named Jesus. Now, we've already proved that he's a historical person. That's in the books. This is a real person. But what happened to this real person? That's where we want to then look at each one of these houses, okay? All right. Animations are going to be out of whack, I think. There we go. All right, so here's how we're going to memorize it. All right, you start with the first house. It's a red house. And I want you to picture this, that Jesus really died. So when you see a red house, think about Jesus really died. Now, you help me understand. You can go and look up all the evidence for it. I don't want to take the place of all the books that you can read and all the articles that you're going to research on this. How would you prove that this man really died? Now, think from a non-theist standpoint. Think about the Romans. Think about the Jews. But you can also consider what the New Testament writings say as well, what the early Christians said as well. How would you prove that Jesus really died? Connor, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say everybody dies to it.
Okay, right. So they're going to say, of course this man died because every person is going to die. Now, we believe that there's an afterlife, right? And there were a handful of people that died and they were raised and they were going to die again. But Jesus, what was different about him? He lived, he died, and he was raised not to die again, okay? So that would be one of the things that we're going to prove is like, well, he's human, right? So if he historically exists, then he probably is going to die. But there's going to be a little bit more about the particular type of death. But you're right on track. Yes, sir.
I don't remember who it was, but didn't we talk last week about someone who mentioned with like the non-Christian sources who specifically said that Christ was crucified?
Yes. All right. So that's going to be some of the Jewish sources. They're going to say that this man was crucified. So it's not that he just died of just an illness, right? We all know that every human dies, but he died at a particular time, in a particular way. He was crucified. Now, you'd want to know a little bit more about crucifixion victims in the first century. Was that something that the Romans were kind of okay with? Like, sometimes they're like, oh yeah, we got him killed that time. Oh, that one got off the cross. Like, usually what happened to crucifixion victims when the Romans had them? Did they ever get off the cross alive? No, they had tactics to make sure that they died. What would be some of those tactics to ensure that a crucifixion victim didn't get off the cross alive?
Wouldn't they like stab them?
Yeah. Okay.
It's just like kill you or like maybe bleed out.
Yeah, so they want to verify that somebody was dead, so they would stab them to make sure, going up underneath the ribs, right? Would be, the direction that they would have stabbed that way. That's one of those tactics. We're going to come back to that. Very good point. What else?
They break their legs
All right, they break their legs. Why?
because they'd have to push up to breathe again, so if they can't push up, they suffocate.
Okay, so yeah, that's the thing. You're hanging on the cross, and they've got their feet. And their feet, the way that they're on the cross, sometimes we think about Jesus' feet, on top of each other. Well, they have found archaeological remains of crucifixion victims where their feet were actually on the side of the post, and they would put the nail through the heel bones was most likely what went on. So in one of the garbage heaps where they found dead bodies, which is what the Romans would do as well. That's going to be another thing that we have to take note of. Maybe Jesus was just thrown into a big pile of dead bodies. Why would we think that he was in a special grave, right? Well, there's some reasons. But it's the idea that they were crucified in a particular way. He had the nails in there. So in order for them to be able to breathe, they had to push up on their feet. They have to pull up on their hands, and their back is, scraping against the wood. And most of the time what happened is they would asphyxiate while they were on the cross because they just got so tired they wouldn't be able to lift themselves. So if they come in and break their legs, they're not able to push up anymore. And part of the death process with the amount of fluid that builds up when they stabbed Jesus' side, what came out? Do you remember? Blood and water. So most likely they punctured the pericardium around the heart, which is where the water would have come from, which once again would be a telltale sign that he actually died. Now what's interesting is that medical examiners have looked at just the literary text about what happened to Jesus. I'm not saying that they believe in him as a Messiah, that he's the resurrected one, but just looking at what happened to this individual in the first century. And they conclude across the board that this man, there's no way that he would have made it out alive. And even if he would have made it out alive, for some reason, they must, they thought that they saw, they could feel his blood pumping through him, his blood pressure, but he wouldn't have been strong enough to be able to go all over the place, right? I mean, he doesn't just appear in Jerusalem, he appears all over the place and just making his way through town. No, he would have been severely dehydrated, all of these things. He wouldn't have been able to survive much longer after that. So there's a lot of things for us to use to prove that Jesus would have actually died by crucifixion. We also have some timing of it, which is important. But the first fact, this man died, okay? So the first house you come across, you're going through Roy G. Bipp, is that he really died, okay? Make your way throughout the neighborhood. You're going to come across, I had some pictures. This is what they would have used to beat him, the flagellum. The Romans were good at that. That's what happened in the scourging. And then here's the heel bone that was discovered. That's the spike that goes through the side of it that would have been into the piece of wood, which is why it's bent, and they couldn't get it out. And so that's where it would have been. All right, so here's the other one, animations. Oh, well. But this is the orange house, all right? So you go from the red house to the orange house. And when you think about orange, think about the disciples were willing to die, all right? So some people are going to say, you know what? Yeah, this whole time, the disciples are just going to make up this whole story. They're going to fabricate the story that Jesus was raised from the dead. So they're just all lying. What would make us believe that they were lying? Or what, on the other side, what evidence do we have to show that they probably were not lying? What would you think? When somebody tells a lie, all right, if you've ever told a lie, why would you tell a lie? Does it get you what?
Don't want to get in trouble.
All right, you don't want to get in trouble.
Fear.
Fear, okay. Does it, we think that a lie is going to help, but sometimes it does. But what were they lying about? All right, let's say that the disciples were lying. What did they get out of it? If they were telling a lie, what did they get out of it?
Death.
They got death. What else? Persecution. Did they get like the top tier things? They got money and power and sex. So that's the things that people lie about and what everybody wants. Did they get those things? No, they didn't live that kind of lifestyle. That's not what they were trying to pursue. So if they were telling a lie, what did they get out of it? Nothing, right? And a lot of people are, they'll take a lie all the way to the grave. And some people will do that. They'll die for a lie, is what maybe somebody would say. But that many people, somebody's going to bust, right? Somebody's going to say, look, we stole the body. We did this just to make a big story over it. But no, they were willing to die for what we know is truth. They wouldn't have done that for an actual lie. Because that's just not how we work as humans. Now, somebody may interject as well. They're like, okay, hold on now. What about all these other religions? Because maybe like you think about Islam, and Islam has truths, non-truths in there, right? And people are willing to die for their religion. So what makes the disciples different than a Muslim? What would you say?
Jihadists, Muslims die for what they believe to be true.
Okay.
The disciples would have been dying for their own life.
Okay, right. So if they were lying, that's the whole idea behind this. It's not that people are willing to die for their religions, but it's to look at explanations for what's going on. If they were lying about Jesus and they're willing to die for it, that doesn't really add up. But what's different with Islam is that they think they're dying for what is true. Okay, so these people must have believed that they were that these things were true, and they're willing to take it to the grave as well. And you've got stories, you've got historical evidence that talk about. We're going to go to this next house, that they were martyrs. And we've got, Luke seems to be a credible person, and he's telling us the story of someone like James, the apostle, in Acts chapter 12, who dies. You got someone like Stephen in Acts chapter 7, who's willing to die. All of those things, right? Those are martyrs, all right? Disciples. We're going to use that generically. We're talking about disciples in our studies. The disciples were willing to die, but if they were lying, why would they have died for that? Okay, so that's one of the lines of logic here. All right, then you cruise on to the yellow house. All right, yellow, you think about why, a Y for yellow. All right, see, connect them in your head. Let me ask you this. Why did Paul, you can talk about two different people, why did Paul convert? And then James, and this is going to be James, the brother of Jesus. What caused them to convert? Give me a little bit of profile. What do you know about Paul? Give me his background.
He was
Go ahead.
originally Saul, and he thought that he was doing God's true commands and was persecuting the actual Christians, and on the road to.
Okay. All right, so he was persecuting Christianity, killing the people who were willing to die for it. Okay, that's an important point. What else?
So you think, but thought he was doing it the right thing.
Yeah. So he was fully convinced. He wasn't out of his mind, right? And so that's going to be one of those things. But he thought he was doing God's will. Okay. What else? Was he credentialed? Like, what was his educational background?
Highly educated.
Highly educated. To what degree?
He was a Pharisee.
All right. He was a Pharisee among the Pharisees. How he described himself. He could trace down his teacher Gamaliel. So he was well known. He was leading the rabble that was taking out the Christians. What would cause a man like that to go from persecuting Christians to being a Christian? Something significant has to happen. What does Paul say is the significant thing that happened in his life that caused him to go from a persecutor to a follower?
Being on the road to Damascus and getting blinded.
All right.
If that happened to me, I might do some soul searching.
Right? And what is happening on the road to Damascus? Yes, he gets blinded, but what's really the big thing? What happens to him there? What does he see?
Jesus.
The resurrected Jesus. The one that he knows was killed, because, he knows. He's been around. He knows what happened to this man in that city. But he converts. And people even think, your education, is driven you mad. All of these things, well, what's the likely best explanation for why he would have converted? Well, it makes a lot of sense. Had he seen the resurrected Jesus, not a hallucination, not a fabrication, not a lie, he wouldn't have been persuaded by a lie from these common folk that are coming from Nazareth, right? And they're just speaking normal language, right? He wouldn't have been convinced by them unless he saw the resurrected Jesus. Historians across the board, both secular and theist as well, look at Paul and he's an anomaly. Why would you go from this to this? Well, something significant must have happened. But also, we have another person, James, the brother of Jesus. I mentioned this earlier, but what do you know about him throughout Jesus' ministry? How did he feel about Jesus?
Didn't believe he was the Messiah.
Didn't believe he was the Messiah, thought he was out of his mind, wanted to bring him back home and sequester him. And it's like, hey, you need to come down here, you got to calm down. But what you find in Acts chapter 1 is that James, the brother of Jesus, as well as Mary, the mother of Jesus, are there with the disciples on the day of Pentecost. But then what do you also figure out in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 when Paul is talking about the gospel and he talks about the death, burial, and resurrection and the appearances? Do you notice that it talks about he appeared to Peter and to all the apostles, then he appears to James? What would have caused James to go from a non-believer, not a follower, to a believer? Well, if he saw the resurrected Jesus. Now, and also we know this, we've got Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John that are going to tell us that Jesus' family didn't even believe him. But then what did Josephus tell us about James? We'll pull that up. That was one of the things. What did he say about James? Not that he just existed. Jesus had a brother named James. But what about him?
He was killed.
He was killed as a martyr, believing this. So it's taking the oath the disciples were willing to die a step further, and we're going to identify a key historical person that everybody agrees that James actually existed, and now he's a follower. What would have happened? Well, Paul says it's because he saw the resurrected Jesus. So if we're going to piece together these things, we're just a couple of houses in, of what likely best explains these things if you're going to put them all together. If Jesus really died, but then you've got people that are going around saying that he was actually raised from the dead. That's what they're arguing, right? And then you've got people like Paul and James who are saying the same thing. There's also something else interesting. The greenhouse, you've got the grave was empty. If the Romans and the Jews wanted to shut down this superstition, they want to shut down this religion, what could they have done?
Put a body in the grave.
Yeah, all right, not just put the body in the grave. What else? What would they have done? Pull the body out of the grave, right? Look, y'all need to stop running your mouth saying this man has been raised from the dead. Look, this is a dead guy, right? This is your Jesus, right? I mean, this is the one that we punished. This is the one that we crucified. We know where we buried him. I mean, they even put, guards at the tomb, all of these things. The Jews easily could have proffered up the body. The Romans could have proffered up the body and they could have shut all of this down, but there was no body, right? And in fact, this is interesting. This is another, we're not going to get into archaeology, like a whole session just on archaeology in here. But there was a stone that was put up by the Romans in Nazareth that was prohibiting people from grave robbing. And they're very specific about the punishment that would happen if somebody pilfered a grave and took anything out, including the body. Why would the Romans have taken that and put a statute and an ordinance in Nazareth about robbing graves and taking them out? Unless there was some kind of superstition going around that there was a man who used to be in a grave that's not there anymore, right? And it's the fact of these were well-known graves because we find Joseph of Arimathea is the one that says, all right, we're going to put Jesus in this grave, in this tomb. People knew where it was. I mean, if you got this leader, when he came into the city just a few days, 7 days before he was resurrected, 7 days before, when he came into Jerusalem, so you can read in Matthew chapter 21, you had groups of people that are laying out their cloaks, and they're putting branches on the ground. They're treating him as a king, and then all of a sudden when he dies, everybody's like, I wonder where they buried him. That leader. No, you would have known where this this well-known, whether you thought that he was a blasphemer, or he was out of his mind, whatever it was, everybody would have known where he was buried. It seems to be there's an empty grave because nobody's been able to prop up that body. So you've got, he really died. Oh, the disciples were willing to die for this belief. You got Paul and James. Why did they convert? You've got a grave that is empty. And then it's not just the close group of people that saw Jesus. So I want you to think about the blue house because of the appearances. Some people are like, the apostles, they were just so overcome with grief after the death of Jesus that they all started hallucinating. Don't you know people that talk about after their loved one dies that they feel like they had a good experience and they were maybe in their bed one night and their loved one that just passed away, that was at their foot of the bed, and they had a hallucination and it just gave them comfort. Well, here's the thing, is that people hallucinate. Maybe you've hallucinated, you haven't slept in a few days, and you see things or think things, your mind's just not working on all cylinders. You're like, well, okay, I need to take a nap, right? And I need to eat something, and I'm good from there. But it's not just one person that has a hallucination. You got a lot of people. And in fact, Paul says you've got the 11, among whom is Peter. You've got people like James. You've got Paul. few years later, right, they see a hallucination. But then you also have 500 people, right? He says that in 1 Corinthians 15, 500 people saw the resurrected Jesus. There's no such thing as a group hallucination. Those don't happen. Psychologically, they're not happening. And then for everybody that have the same hallucination and experience it in the moment, those kind of things don't happen psychologically. So because of the appearances and what people are teaching, once again, this is not just because the Bible said so. This is across the board. People are saying that they saw this resurrected Jesus. So there are appearances that seem to have happened. And then the last house, the purple house, that this was preached early. Some people the story of Jesus was just a myth. It was just made up over time, and stories about him began to grow, and he became a legend. And people attributed all these things to him, and he looked like all these other religions. And well, no, this was preached early. As I told you, you can look at historians. They say we know within 2 years of the death of Jesus, whether it happened just because he was crucified and he wasn't raised from the dead, from the point of his death, within 2 years of his life, we knew exactly what was being preached. There are early statements, early writings, early teachings, and people taught that this man lived and he died through crucifixion. He was buried and he was raised. That's what everybody was teaching. That's what everybody was talking about. Even the Romans said it, the Jews said it, the Christians said it. It was preached early. If you were to just look at these 6 lines of evidence, it's not just because the Bible says so. This is what virtually all critical scholars are going to tell you. These things. Yeah, there was no grave because there was no body. There was people claiming that there were appearances. You had the apostles that were willing to die for this kind of thing. If you put all of them together, you then have to decide what provides the likely best explanation for all of that piece of evidence. Is it that Jesus was raised from the dead, or is there some other naturalistic theory? Well, the naturalistic theories, as we pointed out very briefly, they fall short. So it must be that he was raised from the dead. If you're interested in this, you want to know more, I can give you a lot of evidence on it. I just want to at least have it in your mind how to navigate the information so you can generate a conversation with somebody. So appreciate you guys. Next week is combined class, and then we have spring break, so I won't be teaching for 2 weeks, and then we'll pick up with the Bible after that. So, all right, that's it.
That's not the one I was talking about. I think it was not. The other guy just liked to live in
Hey-o.
You said next week's combined class and then your
Spring break. No, there's another week. My schedule is so out of whack. I think people know it. 4th, 11th, 18th. Yeah, no, it's 4th, 11th, 18th. Thank
Well, then there weren't qualifications there. Maybe there's a qualification.
The second that I just decided to dress up, they were like, oh yeah, what are you all cute for? I'm like,